Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you are doing fabulous. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I am I'm a lot of things. Right now, most importantly, I'm a grad school student. My classes started Monday. I'm super excited to be working on my master's in mental health counseling, and cannot believe I'm going back to school. I am also obviously a wellness advocate, a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, a published author, a certified personal trainer, and so many other things, an activewear boutique owner. I am also a jazzerciser, and I don't always wear pink. In fact, I seldom wear pink, but I always wear pink when it's jazzercise and it's Breast Cancer Awareness Week. Which October, as you know, is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So if you are just stumbling on my page, I'm excited to have you here. If you don't see this till afterwards, please hit hashtag replay in the comments or drop a comment so I know you saw it. And if you're here, let me know you're here so I can say hi. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the 3-part music series we just finished up. If you're just stumbling on this page and you want to see those episodes, drop a comment and I will tag you in them to let you know where to find them. But if you scroll back on my page, they're all sitting pretty there. You just have to go a little bit once a week with a few posts in between. It was super fun to do the music, and there might be more of that in the future. But today I'm going to do a little something different in honor of World Mental Health Day, which was yesterday. So I'm going to start with some general factoids, just in case you're a nerd like me, right? Okay, so according to NAMI.org, and I'm going to explain to you what NAMI is. I am also recently the new part-time program director for NAMI Citrus. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and a fantastic opportunity for me to get some field experience in the field that I'm eventually going to be working in. So I'm super excited about that. And according to NAMI, good morning, Miss Danielle, 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 6 U.S. youth ages 6 to 17 experience a mental disorder each year. 47.2%, I told you factoids, but we'll go through these fast. 47.2% of U.S. adults with mental illness received treatment in 2021. These factoids are based on 2021 research. 65.4% of U.S. adults with serious mental illness received treatment in 2021. Are you ready for this? 164 million people live in a designated mental health professional shortage area. Now, the current population of the U.S. is a little over 334 million. So 164 million people is roughly half of that. And that's craziness to me. So what is mental illness versus severe mental illness? Well, serious severe is when one or more disorders result in serious functional impairment. And 22.2% are any mental illness versus 5.5% of adults, which is according to the National Institute of Mental Health. Good morning, Mohammed. I hope I'm saying that right. Versus 5.5% according to the National Institute of Mental Health, which suffer from serious mental illness. So according to the MayoClinic.org, most people will experience mental health symptoms from time to time. When it begins to cause stress or impair in function is when it's considered a severe mental illness. When it's considered a mental illness. So just because you feel stressed and anxious once in a while does not mean necessarily that you are suffering from mental illness. Mild depression and bouts of anxiety are treatable and considered curable, although curable is a stretch. And those living with mental illness, this is the final thing, and this has to do with my teaser when I posted the topic yesterday. Those living with mental illness have 2 stories. The real one and the one they tell themselves. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. So first I want to tell a little bit about my story. And this is going to be the Reader's Digest condensed version because there's some details that just take too long and aren't productive in going into, because everybody has their own stories and their own reasons for experiencing any form of mental illness they may be experiencing. And those differences can be night and day, or they can look very similar. So I always felt, even as a child, even when I was very young, that I was wired differently. Now, we had and I never realized until recently that it was a kind of a stigma in our family, where we had a joke about the granny gene. And that was because I did have a granny that suffered from mental illness, a few different levels: generalized anxiety disorder, clinical depression, various components of anxiety, like severe claustrophobia, severe agoraphobia, and clinical hypochondria. So there was a joke in our family that there was a granny gene. And as a young child, looking at a rack full of medications that at the time were largely placebos, because of Granny's hypochondria, I did not want to be like Granny. I did not want to have a rack of pills on my bathroom door, whether they were sugar pills or not. And at the time, I didn't even understand what sugar pills were. I do now. I didn't want to be like Granny. Okay. So fast forward to my first diagnosis, which was when I was in the process of getting divorced. My husband at the time and I attempted one marital counseling appointment, and the doctor that we saw, who was also a pastor and a professor at a couple of local universities, he looked at me and said, "When was the last, or how long have you been depressed?" And I looked at him, and like he had 10 heads. I just thought he was nuts. So then he reframed the question. And when he reframed the question, it went, "When was the last time you can remember being happy for more than a couple of weeks that didn't relate to a specific event?" And at that point, the tears just started flowing because I couldn't remember. And I'd never thought to give a name. I just thought that the way I was wired, and my constant sadness and my increasing sadness over holidays and my emotional roller coaster was just part of my personality. I thought it was part of me. So he diagnosed me with functional depression and anxiety. Now, that's not in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for the American Psychological Association. But it essentially refers to chronic depression and anxiety that I had learned to function around because I thought it was part of my personality. So that was the first official formal diagnosis. And at that point, the only real formal diagnosis I had ever gotten, that I knew of. And I'll explain that in a minute. So we didn't continue marital counseling, but I did continue seeing this counselor, doctor, therapist, for a while until he passed away. I went to his support group that he ran out of the church that he pastored at. And then he passed away, and I didn't know about the resources that were available. And I may or may not have I don't know if I had insurance at that point. But again, that stigma kicked in, and I'm like, I don't need any more help than this support group, but I lost the support group. So things went for a long time not really being addressed. I started digging into self-help books and kind of working on myself. In fact, one of the self-help books I read was Happiness is a Choice, and there were some eye-openers in that book for me. So that's definitely one that's worth checking out. If you're in a place where you feel like you need to do some work on yourself, but you're not really sure where to start. Excellent, excellent book, Happiness is a Choice. I think by Minirth and Meyer are the authors. And it was excellent. And when I started reading it, and as I read descriptions, I would point to other people and be like, "Oh, that's this person in my life, and that's this person in my life. Oh, well, that's my husband. That's, my parent, whatever." And as I continued reading, I started finding myself in there. And I was like, "Oh, this is me." So it was that was the first eye opener for me, but that's what I had to rely on because I wasn't aware of the resources around me. I was a single mom, freshly divorced, and starting a new job, and didn't really want to seek help, have time to seek help, think about it to speak of. So other issues I had along the way, as I progressed and as I started learning more about myself, I entered college for my Bachelor of Psychology. I began to identify other things that I had experienced along the way, even before my first diagnosis. None of these were formally diagnosed, but for example, as a child, my childhood was challenging. I was termed as incorrigible. That's not really a disorder, but it kind of gives you an idea, if you're familiar with what incorrigible means, that things were challenging. I know now, I didn't know before, but I know now that I was experiencing as a teenager and into young adulthood body dysmorphic disorder. I also know as a teenager I was borderline, and even after I had my daughter, borderline anorexia in terms of the mindset that I had around food and around weight and all of that. As a teenager, I did spend some time in a crisis center after making some suicidal threats. Every decision I made probably until I was 38 years old and went to college was fear-based. I was just literally living my whole life in fear, and anxiety. When I was a teenager in foster care, I was suspected to have borderline personality disorder, but at the time, and I'm not sure about now, at the time, they weren't actually allowed to diagnose that until you were 18 and had been through puberty, because so many of the symptoms mirrored those hormonal changes that come with puberty. But there was information in some of the paperwork that I went after that indicated that they thought that I had borderline personality disorder, but never a formal diagnosis. And then as an adult, it became apparent that part of my anxiety included obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is not the same as OCD, but can quickly become that if not monitored, treated, etc. So those are all informal diagnoses. My formal diagnosis was functional lifelong anxiety and depression at that stage of my life when I was about 28 years old. So second major issue that came up, still not a formal diagnosis, but the second major issue that arose was the onset of severe social anxiety. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, she's here live on Facebook talking to whoever wants to listen. And those of you that know me know that I'm frequently out in the community, networking, talking. Obviously, I am in recovery from my social anxiety, but there was some fairly severe social anxiety that, again, I did not realize I was having. I thought it was shyness. I thought it was nervousness. I thought it was lack of self-confidence. When my job changed, my position at my job changed to the point where I would have to speak publicly. Just this, an act of singling me out for a photo I would turn beet red from here up, but not always noticeable. Having to be on the microphone, I would be shaking so hard that to this day, I don't know how you couldn't hear it in my voice, and maybe you could, and nobody ever really said anything. But when I realized I really had a problem and that something else was going on besides my normal anxiety, was when I had a complete meltdown in front of my daughter and a friend of hers. They were preteens, maybe 13, 14. I was getting ready to go to a bonfire where I was meeting up with somebody that I was kind of having a first date with. And I knew some of the people that were going to be at the bonfire. They were colleagues in the industry I was working. And here I was in the winter time, layered in like 3 layers of clothes because I was always cold. And I was literally pacing around my daughter's friend's foyer in their home, just having a meltdown, trying to figure out how to get out of the cul-de-sac that this was occurring in without anybody seeing me. Tears and freaking out and tearing myself down in front of these 2 preteen girls. And it was in that moment that I knew that something had gone terribly wrong and that whatever was happening was no longer functional. It was now impeding with my regular ability to function. Good morning, Miss Erica. So at that point, again, still not knowing my resources, I muscled through that night because I realized in that moment that the kind of example I was setting, and being familiar with learned behavior patterns and coping mechanisms, I knew that I had to stop when I realized the eyes that were watching me and trying to calm me down. So these 13, 14-year-olds, maybe 12 at the time, I don't remember, were trying to calm me down and settle me down and reinforce good things. And that shouldn't have been happening. These 2 young teenager, preteen girls shouldn't have been trying to trying to fix me, for lack of a better way to put it. And in that moment, I knew that. And in that moment, I decided that I had to muscle through this, because the embarrassment of not showing up, and the embarrassment of what was happening right there in that moment for me, and the horror at what kind of example I was setting up for my daughter, was in that moment worse than whatever I thought was going to happen if I went to this bonfire. And I muscled through and I showed up, and you know what? It really was nothing. It was no big deal. Everybody was receptive. I felt comfortable after a little bit. It took me a little while to warm up. So at that point, I starting to work on myself. Found myself in college a few years later. And as far as the social anxiety, from that point forward, I just kept talking myself through. I would experience a bout of social anxiety, a little meltdown before I had to speak in front of people. And then I would pull myself up and I would say, you have to do this. Think about the example you're setting. So that if all else fails, it was my daughter and her friends, the teenagers around watching me, that propelled me through a lot of this fear. So again, no awareness of resources at the time. And when I started in college during the construction industry downturn, that was when I went into psychology, because that was always my first love, and it became apparent that's where I wanted to be. And I started learning things, and I was at a point in my life where I could apply what I was learning to myself and to my situation. And then it was just a gradual process. From there were a lot of things that came into play that helped me progress. But those are stories for another day. So that's my first story, the Reader's Digest condensed version of my first story, which is the true story from my perspective. So you might remember I mentioned a little bit ago, and in my teaser, that we all have two. Well, there's a second story, and that's the story I was telling myself. And it looked something like, this is no big deal. I'm not seeing a doctor, so I don't really have a problem. This is all something I can handle. I don't need help. It's not interfering with my life, so it's not that bad. I don't have a diagnosis other than this one back here, so I don't need help. And this doesn't look like this person over here that's having these mental issues and is having breakdowns and going to therapy and all this. So again, it's not that bad. So that second story I was telling myself was that nothing was wrong, that I could handle it myself, and that I didn't need any help. So that's the second story that I'm talking about there. So there's your real story, what's really happening. And then there's that second story that so many people that are living with some kind of mental health condition are telling themselves in the world, which is that smile, even when they're very, very sad and feel very, very out of place, and feel very, very down, that smile that says nothing is wrong. And that is why it is so, so important to remember that quote, that being kind to everyone, because you never know what they're dealing with. The person sitting next to you could be dealing with a severe mental illness. Although if you can't see it, it's probably not really severe because it's not impeding with their function, but you only see little facets of what's going on with people. And those that are suffering from minor mental illnesses, or in my case, functional, where they've learned to kind of work it around it and into their personality, you may never know they have an issue. Most people never knew I had an issue until I started pointing out specific symptoms where they're like, oh, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that too. So that's the second story, is the one you're telling yourself and the one you're telling others. So some resources and facts. It is totally possible to overcome and recover from mental illness. In fact, a study from 2012 indicated that 67% of people with past illness had reached symptomatic recovery, which means they're no longer met the diagnostic criteria for that illness, whatever it may have been. Mental illness, as I just pointed out, often doesn't look like what we see, and especially doesn't look like what we see in the media. In the media, it often looks like a very extreme situation, because that's what's highlighted as the extreme. Most of the time, mental illness looks like somebody like me. Just that. Think about that for just a moment. It may look like the person you see in the mirror, if you've got two stories you're telling, okay? There are many interesting arguments on whether or not mental illness is currently overdiagnosed. That's going to be subject to opinion. And I know a lot, but I'm not sure at this point in time that that's something I would want to weigh in on. Plus, I try to avoid political and negative, argumentative type subjects here, so we're going to leave that one alone. But know that there may be times where there's situations that people are looking to have a diagnosis because they're looking for a quick fix. Good morning, Miss Kayla. And it may not be necessary. It may not be necessary. So don't rush for a diagnosis if your symptoms are temporary or if there's something that can be addressed in other ways. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Right now, as a matter of fact, medicine is necessary for some disorders. Now, I tend to be kind of anti-medication for me, not necessarily for anybody else. I have a sensitive system. I know that various medications do various things to my body that I don't care for, so I try to avoid that whenever possible. But medicine is necessary for some disorders and some people, but not all. In minor cases, it's designed to manage symptoms while seeking therapy to solve the problem. So medications, almost in any case, with the exception of antibiotics, but in the case of OTC meds, if you have a cold, whatever, the meds don't fix the cold. They're intended to manage the symptoms while your body works through the cold, if that makes sense. So same idea here. Most mental illness medication treatments for minor mental illnesses, are designed to handle the symptoms while you treat the problem with therapy of some kind. And most of those minor mental illnesses can be addressed with some arrangement of diet, exercise, and self-care. In fact, I was just in a class a couple of days ago where they talked about treatments for several different types of disorders, mental disorders from the DSM-5. And while all of those lists of treatment options looked different, there were certain things that were the same throughout every single one of them, which was diet, exercise, sometimes yoga was tossed in there, or meditation, faith, prayer, whatever that looks like for you. So I find that interesting. And what that means is for minor mental illness, like myself, I have been able to treat a lot of those things organically and choose not to have medicine. But even if you need medicine, even temporarily or long term, it's proven that these things like diet, exercise, and certain types of self-care can actually augment your treatment even if you're on medication. So it's important to look at those things whether you're on medication or not. And it is okay. You don't have to think about my granny's rack of placebos when you think of medicine and think, I can't do that. That's not what it really looks like. But that's what it represented to me, which is part of the reason I was so anti-medication when it came to whatever I was dealing with as far as anxiety and depression. So there are local resources that I wish I'd have known about years ago. I only abused substances for a very short time and got off them fairly quickly. So AA and NA were not really an issue for me, not something I felt like I needed to do. Plus, I was familiar enough with the programs that I could kind of 12-step it out myself. But you see, again, there's that second story telling myself, I don't need help, I can handle this. Okay? Which is not always a bad thing if it motivates you, but it can become destructive. So local resources that we have in Citrus County, which is where I live, look like Club Recovery, which is a group that facilitates or hosts rather AA groups and NA groups. So if there's a substance issue with you or a loved one, that's a place you can check out as Club Recovery. And there's NAMI Citrus, which is who I work for now, but I was just learning about NAMI Citrus before this opportunity came up. And there's so many people that don't realize it's there and that don't understand what it's about. So it's a local affiliate of NAMI National. And again, NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And they offer support groups like the one I was attending that fell apart after the pastor died, after the leader of the group died. Had I known that NAMI existed, I could have continued in a depression, anxiety, peer support group that would have continued to help me tremendously instead of hanging on to what I did learn from that one for so many years without any kind of help. If you are not in Citrus County, Florida, NAMI National has affiliates everywhere. All you have to do is go to NAMI.org and you can search affiliates in your area using your address, zip code, etc. So if it sounds like, there's a family support group, there's a peer support group, different NAMIs have different kinds of programs. Ours has an unofficial teen program. There are options there, and they are grassroots. Most of them are free, if not all of them, and they are worth checking into. Some areas have groups that are similar to NAMI, but not official, so their programs might look a little bit different. But the nice thing about NAMI is because it's a local, state, and national setup, their official signature NAMI programs are taught so that they look the same no matter which NAMI you go to or which program you attend. So definitely worth checking out. So if you're in Citrus, go to NAMICitrus.org. If you're outside of Citrus County, some of you watch me from states away. Go to NAMI.org and find the local affiliate for your area if this is something you feel could benefit you. NAMI also has connections to other resources that might be helpful. And then, of course, if you are considering in any way harming yourself or others, it is important to seek help immediately. I will drop some links in the comments after I'm done today for crisis helplines, etc. And of course, if you go to any of the NAMI websites, the NAMI websites have in-crisis numbers, contact information you can call. It's very, very important to seek help if you are experiencing, like I said, the feeling that you want to hurt yourself or others. Reach out to your doctor, reach out to a crisis line, address it, please. If you know somebody, again, in that situation, these are ways that you can offer help for them. So how can you help others, or how can you help with awareness? Circle back around a little bit to that World Mental Health Day. Last week was Mental Health Awareness Week. Yesterday was World Mental Health Day, and I believe March or May, I have to check, I don't remember, but you're going to hear about it from me eventually, is Mental Health Awareness Month. So how can you help others, or how can you help with awareness? You can listen. If somebody that you feel is showing signs of high anxiety or depression, if you know what that looks like, you can help simply by listening. You can give them a place to just kind of vent to and get things off their chest. You can take a mental health first aid course. NAMI has one. NAMI Citrus has one coming up. I think at the end of this month. I had something else I had to be on, so I can't be in it. But I think that someone in Citrus County is offering mental health first aid courses, probably at least quarterly. If not in Citrus, then nearby. And there is a link I can drop that will help you find a mental health first aid course in an area. Thank you, Kayla. Look at you. I appreciate that. May. I thought it was May, but I was getting my M's confused. You can volunteer for NAMI. So if you are in recovery, for example, I consider myself to be in recovery. I am aware of my symptoms. I am able to spot when I'm starting to backslide a little bit and pull myself back out from there. And I am 100% functional 99% of the time. So I consider myself to be in recovery. Anxiety and depression, to the extent that I had or have it, is not something you ever completely recover from. It is kind of like a substance abuse disorder or alcohol. You always have that disorder. It's that you've learned to handle it. And yes, at this time, I would not meet the diagnostic criteria for either of those disorders. So in that case, if you are that person that's in recovery, you can facilitate with NAMI. You can become a volunteer with NAMI, and you can become a facilitator for these support groups I spoke of. There's other certifications that you can obtain if you feel like you want to give back to that community that you came from, and that you're not sure how. Then reach out to NAMI. Again, if you're outside of Citrus County, you can reach out to your local NAMI affiliate. Or if you're in Citrus County, email support@namicitrus.org, and they can help you. We can help you, plug in to how you can volunteer with NAMI so that you can help give back to that. So those are ways that you can help with awareness and help others or learn more, like I said, with the mental health first aid course. Real quick, before I finish up, another way you can help is to donate to grassroots organizations like NAMI or whatever similar group you may have in your area. If you go to NamiCitrus.org, you can find a Donate Now button. These are grassroots efforts. A lot of them are grant funded or funded from personal donations to be able to keep these programs going and provide the materials for these programs and to educate people. So that's really important too. So if you're like, you know what, I'm not in recovery, I haven't experienced this, or I have experienced this, but I'm not ready to facilitate anything, and I'm maybe not ready to go to a support group, but you want to give back in some way, donations are great. Another thing to consider, and I'll mention this briefly, and this is the last time I'm going to mention this on a Wellness Wednesday for a bit, because this isn't intended to be any kind of a sales pitch. I mentioned earlier that I am a published author. I have a chapter in this book, which is an amazing compilation of 25 women who have overcome amazing odds to become successful in some way, shape, or form. It's called Unstoppable Volume 2. I am in here with a little bit more of an expansion on the story I told today. If you would like to support NAMI and you would like to have a signed copy of this book, you can do it in one shot. You can grab a signed copy of Unstoppable. You just have to drop a comment or send me a message. I'll make arrangements to ship it to you. It's $29.95. It will be signed, and over half of that, all I'm doing is covering the cost of the printed book. Over half of that is going to be donated to NAMI Citrus. I've had several sales already. All those funds, anything extra above and beyond the cost of the book and shipping, is going directly to NAMI Citrus. And that I started before I took the position because it's such an important thing. It's such an important thing to be aware of mental illness, to be aware of the resources around you and how you can help or how you can help yourself with those resources. So keep that in mind. Let me know if you want a signed copy of the book. We'll figure it out from there. I hope you enjoyed today's. It was really important with World Mental Health Day being yesterday for me to kind of cover this so that you had a little bit more awareness, if you didn't already, of what mental illness can look like versus what we see on TV all the time, because what we see on TV all the time is sometimes the more extreme end of it. And that's not what the vast majority of people are necessarily living with. So I appreciate you. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please share. If you have a topic you'd like to see me cover in the future, we try to stay away from politics and negativity. Send me a message. I love to learn, so I can dig into it a little bit and use it for a future topic. Drop a comment if you found this helpful. I'm not seeing a lot of comments this morning on Facebook. Sometimes Facebook shows me, sometimes they don't. So if you commented or asked a question while I was talking and I didn't respond, then that means it didn't show it to me, and I will get back to you ASAP. And here very shortly also, I will be dropping some links in the comments, like for NAMI Citrus and for some of those crisis lines, etc. The mental health find a mental health first aid class near you, so that you have access to some of those resources. Thank you so much, Kayla. I love Wellness Wednesdays too. But most importantly, I hope you all have a fabulous day. I hope you learned something, and I hope you all are well today. I will see you next Wednesday for episode 53. Thanks so much. Bye.